Dan here from the Functional Training Institute, and welcome to the spring edition of Upskill. Now, what we're talking about today is the posterior chain. And we're at the fantastic Primal NRG in St. Peter's, and we're going to be using one of my favorite training tools, the kettlebell. For me, there are a few better tools for training the posterior chain than the kettlebell itself. Magnificent movement. Now, you see the posterior chain. Firstly, let's clarify what it is. A lot of people misunderstand what the posterior chain is. And really, it's all these muscles running up our rear, okay? So we go from our hamstrings to our glutes to our spinal erectors, all the way up to our lats, all right? Very, very important. And it builds on what we talked about last episode with our core, okay? You need a strong posterior chain to be able to function at your very best, whether you're just a sedentary kind of client or just an everyday client, or whether you're an athlete. And you see, it's often ignored, the posterior chain. Where people feel comfortable moving is through the knees, not so much through the hips. And so what we see is we see people with very strong quads, but very weak hamstrings and glutes and lower back in particular. And it's really why I'm such a big fan of kettlebell programming, because so many of the movements are based around developing the force, developing the power from the posterior. And the hip hinge is indeed actually the most powerful movement our body can create. So you think about those big Olympic movements like the snatch and the clean, that generates from a hip hinge. Now, there's a couple of key points before I get to the movements that are going to light up our posterior chain and really get it firing. There's a couple of key points we need to really be mindful of. First and foremost, with the hip hinge, the spine is super important. So I'm going to be having a neutral spine throughout all of these movements. I've got 4 different movements that I'm going to showcase, or variations thereof, and each one of them will have a nice neutral spine. And a neutral spine is not a straight spine. We're just maintaining the natural arches in our back as we move through. The second thing is that the power is generated from the hips. So some people, when they see a kettlebell swing, which you're going to see very, very soon, will go, that looks like it's an upper body motion, or the kettlebell snatch. In fact, what we're doing is we're creating force, we're creating power all the way from the ground, all the way up the kinetic chain. It's a kinetic chain through the posterior chain, and the last thing in that chain is the bell itself. But all the power has been generated from here. So, first movement we're going to have a look at is our kettlebell swing. Such an incredible, powerful motion that really lights up that posterior chain, but where so many people get it wrong. So let's start with a couple of key tips, and then we're going to put all this into a workout so you guys can get amazing results for your clients straight away. All right, so first, straight away from my start, I'm going to hinge. At this point, I'm already loaded up the posterior chain. All right, I'm now going to swing, and when I swing, I'm going to generate that power from my hips. All right, what's very important is I bring the kettlebell to eye level, not above. This isn't an upper body motion, all right? Secondly, my arms are actually pretty relaxed. So once that kettlebell's here, it's actually in free flight. I'm just guiding it, and I'm keeping the kettlebell nice and close to the hips. So to demonstrate the power of the posterior chain, the kettlebell's actually in free flight. So here, free flight, as we move through. All right, and when you're at the top, everything is strong. We talked about core control last episode. This is braced as strong as possible, like someone's going to punch you in the stomach. That's what your core is doing. Glutes are tight as they possibly can be as you're moving through it. That's our first exercise. Our second one's a lot different. That's what we call a ballistic motion. This one's more of a grind, and it's a single leg deadlift. And the reason I love this for the posterior chain is it also challenges our lateral subsystem, all right? So our opposite adductors and obliques have to work to stabilize the imbalance. So let's take a look at it. All right, so what you want to resist is those hips turning when you're doing that single leg deadlift. Nice and slow and controlled, and having a unilateral exercise as opposed to that big bilateral exercise is going to incorporate more of our stabilizers. So now not only are we working those big prime movers, but those little stabilizers are now switched on even more so. And our third exercise that we're going to do is our snatch. Now our snatch is a brilliant explosive motion. And the reason I've chosen the snatch is, again, we've got now an asymmetrical load from the upper body. And this means, and studies have shown, particularly with the kettlebell swing, when I'm driving it up, my contralateral glute, the voluntary contraction of that glute is higher than almost any other exercise. So if you've got weak glutes, this is going to do it. And the power to get this bell overhead is going to come all from the hip. So let's take a look at it. As we move through, nice and explosive that motion as we're moving through. So what we're going to do now is we're simply just going to take those three exercises, those three brilliant exercises: kettlebell swing, single leg deadlift, and the snatch. I'm going to incorporate it into a very, very simple workout. We're simply just going to do 30 seconds of each movement and then 15 seconds of rest. It's that easy. Now, because we've got two unilateral exercises, what we'll do is we'll actually do 30 seconds on each side, and then you might do this for a number of rounds. You might go 3, 4, 5 rounds. We'll just do one today just to showcase the principle. So I'm just going to set up my interval timer. We'll get this ready. Very, very simple exercise training program, guys. We've got 3 seconds, and then I'm going to be on those kettlebell swings. All right, heart rate is up. A little bit of conditioning in this posterior chain workout as well. Really going to change the pace now. So we've just gone from something very ballistic, very fast, into now something slow and controlled. All right, got to bring my heart rate down. Got to make sure those hips don't turn as we're moving through. And it's actually a 1-to-1 work-rest ratio. So it's 30 on, 30 off. All right, here we go. There's one side done. We'll switch to the next side. You can see my nervous system being challenged. You can see it moving as I'm fighting that rotation. I'm fighting that shift as we're moving through. Very, very challenging. You just want to take it nice and slow as we move through this one. I'm going to do the other side to balance it out before we move on to the snatches. As you can hear, breath is up, heart rate is up, but more importantly, I can feel that posterior chain is lit up. All right, here we go. All right, there we have both sides, nice and balanced, all right? We've got two very different exercises. Now, 30 seconds of snatches will be quite challenging. What I have to remember is to drive from the hips, because if I simply try to use my upper body on this, it's not gonna happen. It's not gonna work, all right? So we've got to remember the power of the posterior as we move through this. If you need to take an extra breath on the snatch, do so at the top, but make each contraction as powerful as you possibly can. We got one more on this loop. And so what you have is not only do you have a great posterior workout here, but you've also got a great conditioning workout as well. We're working big muscles, so the capacity is that they can do a lot of work. This is our last 30 seconds. Let's make it our best 30. Well, there you have it, guys. There's just one loop. You can see the power of those exercises, the impact that they have. I assure you, I promise you, you incorporate these movements into your training program, your clients are going to have an incredibly strong, efficient, just maximal performing posterior chain. Thank you very much for watching. Over to you guys.